Hello everyone, welcome to the Global Mapper webcast for the month of August. My name is David McKittrick, Senior Application Specialist here at Blue Marble Geographics, and sitting right next to me here is Josie Wilford, an Application Specialist.
Hi David, and hello everyone. Thank you for joining us today.
As you can see on this slide, the topic for today's presentation is attribute management in Global Mapper. When we talk about GIS, acronym of the initials GIS, the I stands for information, and in this presentation we're going to deal with information. We're going to deal with data and how Global Mapper manages data, how we can manipulate that data and represent that data in some of the mapping workflows. We've got a number of scenarios we're going to cover today in which we manually create attributes and manage attributes. We're also going to introduce some more automated attribute management functions and end up with some very interesting thematic representative maps for showing some of this data. This is a recording, so obviously live interaction is not an option. We will in the future have more live presentations in which you can ask questions. So this is a recording, so unfortunately the question option is not available.
So if you do have questions, you can contact us at geohelp@bluemarblegeo.com, or you can visit the Global Mapper forum to post questions or find out how others are using the software. And at the end of today's presentation, we'll show a slide with that information. So David's going to take us right through the agenda now. So what are we going to cover?
Okay, today, well, first thing we're going to cover, Josie, is a look at the basic process of adding or editing attributes in Global Mapper. For very basic operations, you're drawing an object on the map, a line, a point, or a polygon. We're going to cover the process of adding relevant information to that. It's a very manual process in this context. I'm not sure it's necessarily that useful, but we want to start with the basics. As a prelude to that, we'll also talk a little bit about what attributes are. For those of you who are completely new to this idea, we will introduce the concept of attribution. Josie, I believe it's Josie, or maybe me, I can't remember who's going to be doing this section, but we'll talk a little bit about Global Mapper's process of creating a feature type. Now, the reason that you'll find this useful is if you find yourself digitizing a particular type of feature in a recurring basis, you can pre-populate that feature type with whatever attribution is relevant for that particular scenario. And we'll cover that procedure. It's certainly something we would recommend for those of you who use the digitizer and are interested in a more streamlined attribute management process. A more advanced attribute management tool is the process to join attributes. We'll go through a scenario where we take an external file, and using a matching process, we will attribute that information to an existing layer in Global Mapper through that joining process. And as a second part of that workflow, we'll also derive additional data based on a formula. Now, there's actually a couple of variations on this theme that we're going to be covering today. A very basic formula in which we perform a numeric calculation, but I'm going to use the formula function in Global Mapper to do a few other things as well. It's a very, very powerful component of the application. A little bit hidden, not easy to find, but it has many, many applications, and hopefully we'll cover some of those which may be useful for you today. This is an interesting one as well. It's certainly not a new function, but it's gained a lot of relevance in some recent applications that we'll be working through. The ability to apply a URL, a link essentially to an attribute, and then have that link be an interactive component of the map display. The example I'm going to show you is actually accessing some online data through assignment of a URL. I am going to go back and revisit that formula function again as a mechanism for creating this URL, and hopefully, well, my fingers are crossed, if our web connection is working today, we can actually see this in action, downloading some data in real time. The URL could be a local file. You can link to a local file, photograph perhaps, or a PDF, but what we're going to do is actually a web-based URL, so wish us luck on that one. We will do a little bit of querying and filtering of attributes. This is again perhaps a more basic function, but it is important to note the attribute management function in Global Mapper is similar to using a spreadsheet, and you obviously have the ability in a spreadsheet to do sorting and filtering and querying of attributes, and Josie towards the end of our presentation today is going to introduce the tools in Global Mapper that let us perform these operations. And finally, and this is kind of the catch-all section at the end, and hopefully we'll have enough time to cover as much of this as possible. We have a number of functions in Global Mapper for automatically assigning attribution. Those of you who have used a digitizer may be familiar with that right-click menu, the notorious right-click menu. one of the submenus that's available there is a tool for assigning attribution. I think it's attribute style functions, I believe that's what it's called. Yes. And you'll find under that submenu a number of options for, as I said, assigning attributes in a fairly automated way. Things like counting the number of points within certain areas, applying elevation to objects in a map. So we'll go through some of those again based on time. Hopefully we'll have time to cover those. So the first section, the first bullet, as you can see on the screen, is manually adding or editing attributes. And as I said during the introduction, we are going to also kind of more broadly introduce the concept of attribution in Global Mapper and how you can interact with the attributes in your features on the map. So let's take a look at some map data. So as you can see, we have some data on our screen. This is, most of you will recognize, a map of Texas. These are the counties in Texas, I believe, and we're going to be using this particular file in a few different scenarios today. I didn't create this file. This is something I downloaded from a website. I can't even remember where it was. It's been so long ago. I've used this a lot. But when I downloaded the file, there was attribution pre-assigned to all of the objects or all of the area features you see on the map. Now, Global Mapper provides a couple of ways of interacting with that attribution. The first and probably the most fundamental way is using the feature info button. It's right in my toolbar. Hopefully you're seeing that right up at the top of my screen. With that tool selected, as I move my cursor over a specific feature and select it, you'll see for that specific feature, you'll see a summary of the information and a tabular view at the bottom of the screen. The attribute name, of which there are 4, and the corresponding value. Now, through the course of today, we're going to be dealing with adding and modifying attribution, attribute fields, and assigning values either manually or, as you'll see later, in an automated way. Now, in this case, we've got the name of that particular county, the population, the areas noted here in square miles, as is the region. Now, the region in this case refers to a designation assigned by the Texas Railroad Commission, and we're going to use those variables going through various scenarios today. So, feature info button, feature info tool, I should say, is the tool that allows you to interact with those features. With the feature info tool, there's only one object can be displayed at any given time. There is no option to drag to select. This is a single object. It's almost like a dynamic querying function. Give me the information about this feature, but as I said, it's only one at a time. One of the things that's come up recently, and this is a question I think one of our customers asked, what if you have overlapping features or perhaps 2 layers on top of each other? How do you select objects that are underneath? This is a little known trick in Global Mapper. I don't have relevant data now, but if I were to right click at this location, it will cycle through the various layers, providing information about each layer successively. So just as an FYI, if you're interested in accessing information about a feature that's underneath, simply use the right mouse click as opposed to the left mouse button, and you'll get that information. So feature info. I'm quickly going to introduce as well the search function. I promise I won't steal any of Josie's content that she's going to cover later. But the reason I'm going to bring it up in this context, and again, I'm going to show you the button in the toolbar, my little binoculars button. This provides a couple of different functions. Primarily, this is intended as a querying function, which we'll see later. But it also provides a tabular view of the same data. In this case, we're looking at all of the objects in this layer and all of the relevant attribution, not just for a single object. And I promise I will close this now. I'm not going to steal what Josie's going to be covering later. And the final thing I want to show you by way of introduction is the digitizer itself. The digitizer is also a selection tool in its native form. You'll notice it says edit where my cursor is located. I'll just hit my thumb there, apologies. The cursor, the tool, is now waiting for me to select something. And when I select it, I have the option to edit it. We're going to be revisiting this menu throughout the course of today, introducing various other additional functions. But the simple interaction with your attribution, when I select edit, you'll see the same tabular information here. You will also note that we have editing tools in here. So we can edit a selected attribute, we can delete an attribute, we can add additional attribution, all of which we're going to do throughout the course of today. So feature info is a single object selection tool. Modify feature, the digitizer, allows you not only to select a single feature, but I'm just going to drag a box around a section of the state, and I can universally now modify the attribution for those multiple selected objects on my map. As you can see on the screen, I've loaded another layer. I'm going to demonstrate the basic process of manually assigning attributes to a feature that you digitize. Now, with the caveat that it's probably not the best way or the most efficient way to do this, but by way of introducing some of those functions I briefly showed you in the modify feature info dialog box, I'm going to perform a digitizing exercise. As you'll see on the screen, we have some imagery representing an area fairly close to our building here in Maine. This is a partly forested, partly agricultural area, and I'm going to assume in this case that my object is to do some digitizing of the field boundaries here. So I'm going to use my new area tool for this purpose. I'm just going to very quickly and without too much care and attention, I'm going to outline the boundary of this particular field. The digitizer, those of you who haven't used it, we have a webinar that's available on our website that covers digitizing functionality. So if you're new to the drawing or digitizing function, feel free to reference that to get more information. When I have that digitizing process complete, I'm prompted with the modify feature info dialog box as I showed previously. Now you'll notice off the bat with this feature type, in other words with this area, the fact that this is an area, Global Mapper automatically assigns two attributes, the perimeter and the enclosed area. You'll notice mine are in meters and square kilometers, and that's simply because my local configuration or settings have been assigned to those metric units of measure. That's configurable, that can be set up by you in the configuration dialog box to be whatever units of measure you want. But as you'll also note, there's no additional attribution. This is a fresh digitized feature. There's no additional attribution. Just for the purpose of illustration, what I'm going to do right now is click the add button right below the attribute table, and I'm going to add an additional attribute. I'm going to call this one crop type, and we'll assume that this field is actually being used for some agricultural production. So I'm going to type crop type, and I'm going to add an attribute value of, what do you think's growing here? Bananas,
corn.
Perhaps? Corn?
Corn.
Oh,
This is Maine.
This is Maine. No bananas, unfortunately. Corn. This is a cornfield. And we'll click OK. And confirmation of that, you will see right in the middle of the screen, we now have a new attribute, crop type, and we've assigned the attribute value of corn. And we click OK, and that attribute has been manually assigned. Again, very manual process. If we were to repeat this for each field and add not only a single attribute perhaps, but perhaps additional attribution, you can see how laborious, how difficult this process might be, or how time consuming. So again, we're going to introduce in a little bit how you can automate the assignment of attributes through the creation of a feature type. Okay, as you see, we have shifted our focus. Now we're again back in Texas again. We've pre-configured a map with some colors representing the regions I was referring to previously. I'm going to hand over to Josie here now. We're going to talk a little bit about, again, covering what would be a basic function of Global Mapper. We're going to talk about the editing process, editing attributes for existing features.
Okay, great. Thanks, David. As you can see, our map has a bit of a theme. We've colored the individual counties based on the region, so you'll be able to see the changes we make. I'm going to choose the digitizer, select a county, right click and edit. And I can edit any of these attributes, so I can click on region and choose edit, and I get a drop down menu of other options that have been chosen, or I can just type something in. So I'll choose 5, see what happens, and click OK. So cancel out of that, and you can see the color of the area feature that I selected has changed. So I assume this is actually region 5 over here. And I can do that for multiple features. So I can select a few at a time, right click, edit, and a similar modify selected features dialog pops up, and I can choose the region option attribute and edit, and I can change these to 5 as well. And hit escape, and I can show that I have changed that group all at once. So we can also go to the search vector feature dialog. You can do a search criteria, which we'll show you a bit later, or you can manually select. I'm just selecting the top, holding shift and selecting left clicking with the mouse to select a group, and then I can choose the edit selected button, and a similar dialog shows up, and I can change these to region 5 as well.
Region 5 is becoming pretty large here.
Well, they're expanding. And I can go OK and close that. And oh, I can see that I have changed these. This is the problem with randomly selecting features with no reference. Looks like I've changed this little region down here. So all the individual area features that previously had been 4, I changed over to 5, and just because we have this color assigned to that region that you can see it visually here. So we can also follow the same method to delete attributes. I could have shown you this at the same time. I'm just going to select this familiar group, right click, edit, choose the region attribute, and delete it completely. Obviously you can do multiple ones at a time. Go OK, and when I hit escape, now there is no color applied because there is no actual attribute value for that.
So to clarify, Josie, what you did there is actually delete the attribute itself as opposed to just the value, correct?
Yes, that's correct. You could just delete the value, so I'll just show this one. So I'm selecting it with a digitizer, right click, edit, choose the region, edit, and just delete the value. And again,
yeah, it looks like it's a default style for that.
Oh,
so
I see. Okay, so it doesn't show it, but as you can see, the value's gone.
Right.
So if I can use the info tool on that feature, we can see that the value is missing. So that is retained. So another option we're going to look at is splitting. Right now all of these counties are in the same layer, so we can see it here in the overlay control center. There are 920 features. We have an option in the right click menu for the overlay control center. We can split all of the counties onto separate layers. So I'm going to right click and choose split into separate layers based on description attribute value. And I'm going to choose region to split on, and OK. So now I can expand the original layer and you can see all of the individual regions split onto their own. So I can turn some of these on and off and work with them individually.
That function is very useful, and you may have seen us do this in a different context when you're working with CAD data, DXF or DWG files, where very often the file will be displayed or be imported as a single large entity, even though there's various components within that CAD drawing. What Josie just showed you is great for that application as well, where you can split the file out into more recognizable components for simplicity of management. So, thank you, Josie. Kind of made a mess of my map here. Look what you did.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
You can fix it.
I guess. Just don't save anything.
Start over.
Okay. So we're going to move kind of back in time a little bit here. We're going to go back to the basic digitizing and assignment of attributes, kind of recreating what I had done a few minutes ago, which is creating attributes for that field. But before we do that, we're going to introduce the idea of a feature type. Apologies, Jose, I am actually going to remove this map from the screen, I hope you don't mind. And I will not save. The feature type management is controlled or configured, a good word, in the configuration dialog box. If you haven't been here already, if you haven't looked at this dialog box, this is the global settings area for Global Mapper. Sixth button in from the left in the toolbar. You can also access it from the tools menu. Tabs in here allow you to control things like units of measure, we mentioned that earlier, how the data behaves, vector display, filtering different types of data. You will also notice that there are 3 tabs pertaining to line, area, and point styles. Now obviously today, in this scenario, we're going to be dealing with just our area styles, because what I want to do is I want to create a pre-configured feature type that will allow me to digitize, and after finishing the digitizing process, automatically add the necessary attributes for the feature that I'm creating. So this will hopefully make more sense when we actually do it. Under area styles, you'll notice first of all there are a number of styles that are pre-configured. I'm assuming most of you will have we'll have use for some of these, but not for all of them. I'm going to show you in a few minutes how you can filter this list as well. What's more important is you can actually add your own here. So under the list of existing area types in this case, I'm going to click the New Type button. And I want to call this new type of feature that we're going to be creating fields. Type F-I-E-L-D-S. And I can give it a specific fill color or a fill pattern if I like. I'm going to make it a solid fill, and I'm going to make it a green color. And that's a default. We can change this on a case-by-case basis. We can apply a thematic process to represent some of the inherent data. But as a default, as a starting point, every time I use this particular feature type, when I add a digitized feature, it will inherit this color. Obviously, you can change other visual characteristics, border style, border width, etc. Transparency is another option in here. For the time being, I'm just going to click OK. And you'll see now that this new feature type has been added to my list. You will also notice right below that tabular view we have an attributes button, and this is the real reason we came in here today, because what I want to do for this feature type is pre-populate a list of attributes that are going to be relevant when I use this type. And first I'm going to add my attribute name here. As you can see, I'm going to call this one crop type. This is the first attribute. We did this manually earlier. We're going to do it in a fairly automated way now. So crop type. I do have the option at this stage of adding an attribute value. Now, in most cases you will not do this, because obviously every time you create a new feature, you're going to have to recognize or address what the particular crop type is for this field, and it may not always be the same. In fact, it probably won't be. The only time you may consider using this is when you want to default. You want it to have a default feature type. You want to have a default crop type. So let's say 90% of my fields are corn fields. I may put a default value in on the assumption that if I need to change it for the 10%, I can do that manually. So I'm going to leave that blank for now. I'm going to leave my crop type blank, and I can add additional attributes. I'll add one more. Let's call this one farmer's name. I'm just making this up as I go along. And again, this can be populated with a default value if necessary, but in most cases you'll probably leave this blank. So we've got two attributes, neither of which are pre-assigned with values. So as I initiate a digitizing process, I will have the option to just simply populate those values. And as you will see, once I've populated crop type once, let's say with corn or with bananas or whatever it is that crop happens to be, that value will be remembered, and you can simply use a drop down to populate it for each successive digitized feature. So I'm done here. I'll click OK, and I'm going to load up the file that we had previously. So as you can see, we have the fields layer, our imagery on the screen once again. I'm going to repeat what I did earlier. Hopefully I can do a better job at my digitizing process. But once again, using the digitizer, we will outline the extent of this field. Oh, I just made a mistake there. And right-click to finish. Just extended the size of the field a little bit. And you'll see again by default where we were earlier, there's a finite list of attributes, just our perimeter and enclosed area. But what I want to do is choose fields from my feature type list right at the top of the screen. We'll go to the F's, fields, it's right here, and you'll notice now, well, first of all, my color, confirm the green color, and you'll know I have crop type and I have farmer name. And I'll edit the crop type. We're not adding this time, we're editing, so I think I may have something. There we go, corn. And we'll click OK. And farmer's name, I think I may have to manually type this. We'll call this one Farmer Brown. And that, again, will be a value that will be available to me when I continue this process. So as you can see, this idea of pre-populating the feature type with the relevant attribute fields makes your workflow much, much more simple. Needless to say, in my case, it's a very simplistic example because I've only got two attributes. But if you consider the likelihood of having hundreds of attributes, or dozens, or perhaps even many dozens of attributes, this will certainly streamline that process. Now, one thing I'm going to show you here that is another option. If you're applying attributes from an existing feature, in other words, if you import a file and the attribute structure is already in place, you do have the option, it's grayed out in my case, but you do have the option to apply the settings from a selected feature. Now what that will do is it will pre-populate your attribute table with what it sees in the selected feature that you've just imported. So for instance, with our Texas counties, if we wanted to create a new Texas county and we used this option, it would be available if a county had been selected. What we would be able to do is pre-populate those 4 attributes in everything, all of the features we digitize from there going forward. So that's a little introduction on feature types. It certainly automates the manual feature generation process.
Thanks, David. All right, our next topic is joining attributes from an external file. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at a spreadsheet that lists oil production for the Texas counties, and then we're going to join those to the counties themselves. Here is an example of the file we're going to join. So we want to we have a list of the county names, and we have a list of oil production per county. And so we want to add this value as an attribute, and we'll join based on this county name. So the county is showing here in the file, and it's also showing on our map for each county. Okay, here we are looking at our familiar state of Texas here and the Texas counties.
So if you use the feature info now, I think this is the same attribution as before. So you've got 4 attributes here. So the objective of this is to take that spreadsheet and add that as an additional attribute for each of these counties, right?
That's right.
Okay.
So we'll end up with 5 attributes instead of 4.
Excellent.
So to join the spreadsheet, you right-click on the layer in the Overlay Control Center and go to Join Table. Going to select that, and I'm going to navigate to that spreadsheet I was showing earlier. Here it is, and open. Now we have to go through and decide how to join the 2 together. So I know it's a comma delimited file, and I have county name in the spreadsheet, and the county is under name, the attribute name for the map. I'm going to choose name and click OK. Now we've just received a pop-up that 920 features have been updated.
And I think there's an indication somewhere on here that there's some duplicates as well. Yeah, 18 features have duplicate join fields. We're not going to do this right now, sorry Josie, but you'll notice at the bottom it says a complete report has been copied to your clipboard, and you can paste that into some sort of text application. If you do that, if you're going through this process yourself, those duplicates are because the coastal counties have more than 1 polygon. So there's actually multiple. You saw that earlier when you selected multiple. So the attribute that Josie has joined has actually been assigned to each of those collectively. So in 18 counties, the value was assigned more than 1 time, and you'll get that confirmation if you actually did paste that into a text document.
Great. So I'm just going to click OK, and now we can use the feature info tool again to see what we have accomplished. And you can see there's a 5th attribute here, and the value for this county is quite high. So for Jones County, we have over 700,000 barrels being produced annually.
Okay, so the next section, thank you Josie, the next section, as you can see on our agenda, is using a formula to create attributes. And it actually is a natural progression from what Josie had just done, because the act of joining obviously brought in the production data for each county. We could proceed with that to generate some sort of visualization, but I think to make this a little more meaningful, the scenario that we've developed here, we're going to actually produce another new column, another new attribute, if you like, in which we calculate the oil production value per unit of area, and in this case it's per square mile, which will give us probably a more meaningful reflection or representation as to how much oil comes out of the ground in that particular county. We're not dealing with total, but we're actually weighting that against the actual area of the county. So in order to perform this operation, and again this can be done in many different applications, but what we're going to do is we're going to build a formula. We're going to build a very simple little numeric formula to do that calculation. So we're back in Texas again, and as Josie just saw us, we have our oil production value noted here as our 5th attribute. You may have noticed when Josie right-clicked on the layer, when she selected Join Table, right above Join Table is Calc Attr, which is short for Calculate Attribute. This is a very, very powerful component of Global Mapper. It's probably the most powerful attribute management tool within the application. And it's been enhanced recently with the release, I think it was version 16. Yeah, we added a number of different tools for doing more complex formulas. If we have time today, I may actually show. It's a little bit out of context of with our agenda, but I may take the time to show you a little more advanced formula creation capability that's available now. When I select that option, and by the way, you will have noticed both Josie and myself when we access these tools, it was layer specific. We're performing this action against a selected layer in the Overlay Control Center. So this is not a feature specific process, but it's pertaining to all of the objects in this layer. So attribute calculation setup, you'll see on the screen. The previous version of this was basically the top half of the dialog box. The bottom section is what's been added recently, and again, if I have time, I'll show you a specific application where we can use a more complex formula to generate new attributes. In our case, what we're going to do is we're going to create a very simple attribute where we're going to take the oil production, divide it by unit of area, and come up with a per square mile value. So first thing I need to do is type in a name for this new attribute, and I'm going to call this oil production, sorry I can't type, per square mile. I'll just abbreviate it. I could, as an alternative, use one of the existing attributes and simply overwrite that with my calculation. So if you want to modify an existing attribute by performing a calculation of some sort, or some sort of formula-based modification, you can simply replace the values that are in there right now with the new values that are going to be generated using this dialog box. But in my case, I want a new attribute, and simply typing it in creates that new attribute. So I'm going to use a simple calculation. Various settings I need to apply here. First is to point to the source attribute. Well, in our case, it's our oil production that originally came in from the spreadsheet that Josie had previewed. And I have an option to add an operation. Operations can be appending as text, prepending as text. I'll do that one actually in a little bit in a different context. We can divide, multiply, subtract, or we can simply use this as an option to copy the attribute, create a copy of what was there previously. In our case, in this scenario, we're going to divide. We're going to divide not by a fixed value, but we're going to divide by the value which is in an existing attribute. And that existing attribute, if you recall, we have a area in square miles value. So to summarize what I've said, I'm creating a new attribute, I'm taking the value which is in oil production, and I'm dividing it by the value that's in area. So this is going to be unique for every one of my counties. Again, we'll come back and visit this dialog box in a little bit to look at some other examples, but for the time being, I'm simply going to click calculate, and it's confirming for me. You may have heard the little beep coming through my speakers there, that we have modified the attributes for all 920 features in this layer. We'll click OK in this case. You'll notice the dialog box stays open because it's quite common that you will apply a multi-level formula. You derive some data and then you need to do something else. And we'll do that in just a little bit in a different context. But in this case, we're finished. We simply hit the close button. And with the drums rolling, if we click on a county, you'll see there's a sixth attribute, and that sixth attribute is a direct calculation based on two of the previously existing attributes, oil production and area square miles. Taking oil production, dividing by area, gives us this value, which is our, as I said, oil production per square mile. Now, in terms of attribute management, this is probably the end of the story, but we're going to continue this. We're going to continue with this theme, and what I'm going to do next is represent this value in a thematic way. In other words, I'm going to visualize my oil production data distributed geographically throughout Texas, weighted per unit of area. I'm generating a thematic map. Now, the way that works, again, it's layer specific, so we're in the Overlay Control Center. You'll see the layer listed here. We have the Options button that pertains to the selected layer, and one of the tabs you'll see under Options is Area Styles. Area Styles will by default display the outlines and the fill color based on the default feature type. I don't have a feature type assigned. If I had created a feature type called Texas counties, I could have pre-assigned a specific color if I wanted, but these are generic, they're unknown, so you're seeing this black outline unfilled polygon. I can override that universally just to make them all a different color. I can go to the bottom, I can assign random colors, which is an interesting visualization. I'm not going to do that right now. What's most useful here is to apply the styling that's based on an attribute or name value. So the attribute that we created is going to form the basis for the visual representation of the data that we've created. Between Josie and myself, created a new useful data set, a meaningful data set. We're now going to visually represent that on the map. The attribute that we're going to use to base this on is our oil production per square mile. And I'm going to cheat a little bit here because I've actually pre-configured a layer style, so I don't have to do this manually. I'm going to load that up from my file, and as you can see, it's listed here. I have to choose this again, oil production per square mile. You'll note all I did with loading that file was pre-assign the colors and the numeric threshold values. These are just increasing intensities of the color blue. So areas with no oil production will be white. Those with the most oil production will be darker shades of blue. Now, this is an interpolated scale. So if I have a value that's somewhere between 1,000 and 5,000, the color itself will be somewhere between these two shades of blue.
So you did create this setup in this dialog by selecting values and interpolating between, and it's just that you saved it out ahead of time.
I saved us a little bit of work, exactly. And this is a useful tool not only in my context where I can simplify workflow for demonstration or training purposes, but also if you're doing this yourself and you're using the same type of data repeatedly, you don't have to recreate the same configuration each time. You can apply the color shading to all states. We could bring in Oklahoma and apply the same colors there. We wouldn't have to recreate it every time. Save to file is what I had done originally after I manually created it.
You can share it with your colleagues.
Absolutely, yeah. Good idea. So once we're done with that, we'll click OK, and hopefully, with my fingers crossed, it will show itself on the map. And what originated as a spreadsheet not 5 minutes ago is now a very interesting interactive map. We can display, obviously visually, the oil production. We can still select each county and get that information as well. And we could show a legend. We could design a presentation map. If I was in the business of supplying the oil production companies, I might want to look at the western part of the state as an ideal location for my business, simply because I now know that's where most of the oil is being extracted from the ground. So I find it interesting when I look at this example that there's a fairly large stripe right through the center of the state which has no oil production whatsoever. I wasn't aware of that until I actually generated this map for the first time. So,
which this kind of changed. I think this data is from 2011, so
well,
don't go making any big decisions based on this map.
True. I probably need to get the most current data, but you can infer a little bit here. So that's the workflow, starting with joining data and calculating attributes as well. I did promise I would go back and visit, and we're still kind of on the same theme of attribute calculation. I'm going to show you another example. It was on our bulleted list. We took it off, but I figure we'll show it while we're here. So this is an unscripted section. I'm going to leave this data up on the screen as it is right now. I'm going to open the formula calculation dialog box once again, or the calculate attribute dialog box, and I'm going to address the section of this dialog box at the bottom where we can use a more complex formula. Now, any of you are familiar with some of the more complex procedures you can develop, or formulas you can develop in the likes of Microsoft Excel, would be familiar with some of the tools you have available. The attribute list is available here. I'm going to bypass that. I'm going to show you the available functions. As you can see, there are a number of options here. This is just a pre-populated list that allows you to choose and basically build a formula based on almost like a wizard. In my case, I'm actually going to do some manual work here because I actually have this noted in front of me. I'm going to create a formula based on the if statement, and I believe these are alphabetized, so I should at least be able to start. Here we go. I'm going to take that one. I'm going to insert that into my my formula builder, and you'll notice in this case, and you'll see on a description here, if the first expression is true, it will return the second expression, and if not, it will retain the third expression. So that's basically what this simple little formula is going to do for us. And in my case, what I want to do is derive a value of small. It's going to add an attribute called small if the population is below a certain level, and large if it's above a certain level. So I'm going to begin by typing those two values in here. And again, I'm typing, which I really shouldn't be doing in a webinar because I'm very slow at it. There we go, small. You'll note it's in quotes, so it's actually going to enter that text expression. And again, I'll delete the placeholder there and we'll replace that with the word large. Now, again, to read the description right above, if what the expression that I'm about to define is true, it will put the word small as a new attribute, or as a new attribute value, and if it's not, if that's false, it will be large. Now, what's my expression? What's the actual criteria that we're going to use here? Well, I'm going to base this on population, but in order to do this, I'm first going to define it as a number value, so Global Mapper knows to recognize a number. I'm going to open my parentheses. I'm going to type the field name population, and I'm going to type this in uppercase because that's where it's listed. A-T-I-O-N. Am I spelling that correctly, Josie? So
Yeah,
if
that looks
number
good.
population, and we can close our parentheses, and in this case what we're going to do is greater than 5,000. We'll go ahead and do that.
It's less than.
Oh, less than, I'm sorry. Less than 5,000, that's true, because the small is the right one. So less than 50,000, I'm sorry. Okay, I should have had this on my clipboard. I got to pasted it in. So if the population attribute is less than 50,000, it's going to add a value called small. And if it's larger than 50,000, it's going to add an attribute called large. So this is just an example of this new, more powerful formula calculation functionality. I need to add a name for this attribute. I'm going to call this population size, just to differentiate it from the original. Population size, or town size, or county size would be fine. And we'll run this calculation. Again, confirming that it's modified the attributes of 920 features. To confirm that that actually worked, let's go ahead and we will click on a county, and you'll notice the population size is below the threshold. It's on small. If I choose one of the ones around Houston area, it's large. So there's a case where we, in developing our formula, established a cutoff and assigned a value below and a value above. And again, I use that as a very specific example of using a more complex formula to derive attribute data from your existing attributes. Okay, I'm going to continue with the mic here, and as you'll see in our agenda, the next section that we're going to cover is the application of a URL as an attribute. This can be done manually. You may have noticed when Josie introduced that dialog box when we were talking about editing attributes, one of the options was to add a file link. So you can manually point to a file and essentially have Global Mapper, the feature info tool, act as a trigger, if you like, to open that file, whether it be a photograph, PDF, or whatever that happens to be. An interesting variant on that, by the way, is you can actually assign the URL to be another Global Mapper workspace. So you can actually access a workspace by clicking at a point on the map. And I've been talking with some folks who are involved in field management for various job sites. Each location has a very specific set of files that are relevant. So building workspaces for those job sites, that can be managed at a global level by providing links to each of those on the map. So very, very interesting application of using an embedded URL. In the example I'm going to use, we're actually going to manually build a URL, and you'll see the way this works when we actually finish the process. Once again, it's going to require me to go back into the formula dialog box, because I'm actually going to create this this field, which is going to be my URL based on a formula, and I'll explain why in just a second. Okay, so what you're seeing on the screen is a simple little text file with a URL that I'm going to use for this exercise. This is actually something that I copied from, or I was able to access from, the Massachusetts Office of GIS. And you'll note here the last section of the URL is simply a placeholder. I put these X's in. This is ultimately going to be replaced by the individual tile ID that's referenced in each of the tile values you'll see behind the screen here. This is Massachusetts, this is the extent of Massachusetts, and this layer is the index layer that covers the extent. I believe they're Mr. SID files that I'm going to access. So based on this URL, I'm going to apply this URL to each one of these tiles, initially using a formula, replacing the placeholder, as I mentioned, with the tile name itself. Now, the best way for me to show this is actually to do it. So first thing I'm going to do is take the first part of the URL. We're obviously not interested in the placeholder, and you'll also note the .zip at the end. Well, note that that has to be added to our URL as well. But I'm going to take the first section and simply copy it to my clipboard. I just Control-C, and it's now on my clipboard, and we can go into the application itself. Now I'll take a look at the existing attribute structure for a selected tile. You'll notice a lot of information in here pertaining to each of the imagery tiles to which this index refers. Important one for us is the tile name, and you'll notice that each of these is unique. Each of these is individual. The tile name is the numeric string that actually will be placed within the URL that reflects the download location for each tile. So what I'm going to do ultimately is create a hyperlink, a URL and an accessible hyperlink that will give me access to that tile from that index location. So the way this is going to work is I'm first going to build a new field, a new attribute field, and I'm going to use the various components that we've looked at to create the URL that reflects that location of each zip file. Like we did before, right-click on the layer, calculate attribute, and we're going to call this download. Now, we're going to use the simple calculation method, just as we've done before. Our source attribute is going to be the tile name. And again, each tile name within each of these area features is unique. I'm going to, instead of using a numeric formula, I'm going to initially prepend as text the first part of the URL. I'm simply Control V, and you'll notice in this little window, it's hard to see the whole URL, but you'll notice that the first part of the URL, the HTTP and the massgis.gov, is noted in here. I will simply click calculate at this stage. Confirmation that it has modified the attributes of all 10,300 of these features. We'll click OK. Now we're not done yet, because the final section of that URL had the .zip suffix, so we need to add that as well. So I'm going to keep the same target field. I'm going to again modify my download field that I just created, but in this case my source is also download, because I'm going to use the download. In this case, I'm going to append as text the simple string of .zip. So whatever content is in download right now, we haven't actually looked at the contents of that field, we will add .zip to the end, and with my fingers crossed, when I calculate, again, it will work. So we'll close this dialog box using my feature info. You will notice immediately that there's a different dialog box that has appeared, an interstitial dialog box asking us what we want to do, because Global Mapper has now recognized that there is a URL embedded in this feature. Initially what I'm going to do is show the standard feature info dialog box just to confirm that that URL actually exists. And you'll note there's the first part of my URL. Where I previously had the XXXXX values, it has inserted the tile name as noted above and appended .zip at the end. Now again, my fingers are crossed, Josie's are as well. Yes. If this works, this will allow us to immediately access that zip file from that location. To make this a little easier to see, I'm going to zoom in a little closer. I'm going to choose a tile at random, once again using the feature info tool. This time we're going to load the URL not as an internet URL where actually we'll access it in an external application, but we're going to download the URL and load it as a new layer. So two things are going to happen. It's going to initially tell me to prompt me to save the file, then it will automatically display it in Global Mapper. So this might take a few seconds depending on the accessibility of the server. It looks like it's actually reached the file, so we'll click save. Right now it's downloading that file. Global Mapper hopefully then is going to automatically load that tile of imagery, and there we go. So using that process, what I was able to do is to create a formula that ultimately ended up being a URL, and in this particular example we used that URL as a mechanism for accessing data from a remote location. The URL could also be simply a way to access an external file, in which case it would open up that file in whatever application or program was appropriate. A PDF, for instance, it would pop up Acrobat and display that PDF.
Alright, the next topic is querying and filtering attributes. So we're going to return to a familiar workspace and look at how we can search for specific attributes. In this case, it'll be the regions of the Texas counties. Alright, here we are again with our Texas counties. I already have the info tool selected, so I'm just going to click on one for reference. You can see there are the 4 attributes, and we have the regions that we're using to create a thematic map here with the colors. So I'm going to go to the search by attribute name description tool up here at the top of our toolbar, the binoculars, and that brings up a familiar dialog. We did look at this a bit earlier, and you can see all of the different area features listed, the feature name, the area square miles, name again, population, and region. So what we can scroll through here and look and see, there's a few different ways to sort. You can click on region and scroll through, and you'll see all the different area features listed with the same region. But we also have this search criteria, which can come in handy. I know people work with large data sets with hundreds of attributes, and sometimes you just want to filter things down and look at a subset. So I'm going to choose to filter by region. We have a qualifier here. I'm simply going to choose equal, but if the attribute value was a number, we could do less than or equal to. We could go with not equal to, which would apply to text as well. So I'm going to choose equal to 8 and change this to number and select new search. So now the search list has filtered down to all regions that include 8.
I think in this case, Josie, you probably should keep it as text because you're not doing a numeric, because it saw the instance of the 8 in that case. So I would hit the new search again. There we go.
All right, so that leads us to just region 8. From here, we could select certain counties, right-click, and we have a few more options here. You could create statistics, copy to the clipboard, copy the results to the clipboard as text, which can then be pasted into an Excel file. Let's see, we can also select with the digitizer tool. So this is how I tend to use it most often, to select with the digitizer tool, and that should be selected in the map view at the same time. Anything else to add to this, David?
Well, I think an important one that you noted in passing, and it's just a question that we get a lot. I'm sorry, I'm a little further from the microphone now. We often get the question, how can I capture the attribute table, for instance, in a spreadsheet? And you mentioned that, and it is worth noting again, when you can select all. There's a right-click option to select all if you... I'm just giving Josie some instructions. But if you right-click now anywhere within that tabular view, you'll note the option to copy to the clipboard as text. There's two variations. One is just simply copying to the clipboard. That's copying the geometric features, allowing you to paste region 8 into its own layer perhaps, or into another layer. But copying the results to the clipboard as text will allow you to open up Excel and essentially recreate that tabular view in Excel or in Notepad or in whatever other application. Josie's actually going through the process here. So if you simply click Control V and confirm, you would have to do an import delimiting process. I believe they're comma delimited here, so
we can do that.
And there we go. Easy. So you're a few steps and you're able to recreate that data. Oh, you'll notice El Paso's. I think you had tab or space as well. So,
okay.
But that's an Excel issue there.
All right.
So yeah, it's a very simple process to capture the tabular data based on whatever query, whatever filtering that had been applied using that query tool. There is one other thing I wanted to show as well, Josie, before we finalize. I know we're slowly running out of time. You'll notice that when Josie created that query, she clicked the new search button. If you need to do a further level of filtering based on perhaps a different attribute, you can do a search within existing results option, and it will filter that based on just searching those. So we're trying to make this up as we go along here. So
turn off the cap locks.
There we go, Andrews. This is obviously going to give you just one result, but search in existing results. And there we go. So it's a subset of a subset, if you like. So query function, very powerful, obviously just for displaying the attribute table, as we alluded to earlier in our presentation, and in a much more methodical way, as Josie just demonstrated, for filtering the data.
Okay. Thanks, David.
Okay, Josie, I think we've reached the bottom of our list here. The final bullet on our agenda, kind of that catch-all, as I mentioned earlier. I know we're running out of time here, but we have a section in Global Mapper, specifically with the digitizer, that will allow you to do automatic attribute assignment. Those of you using the digitizer may have noticed when you right-click that option. We're going to use a couple of the examples in there. I've got several workspaces that I've set up. We'll go through a few of them just to show some of these automated attribute tools. Now, on this first view, you'll see a couple of layers have been added. There is a point layer. I'm going to select, actually I can't select, I was going to say I'm going to select one, but that's physically not possible. You'll note, by the way, in my overlay control center that this layer is red. That's a visual clue that is not selectable. I actually disable the selection of these points, and for a good reason, as you'll see in a second. But if I did, you'll see that these are actually cell phone towers. I think this is covering the southern part of the state of Maine, and this is the location of cell phone towers. I probably should have put on some sort of boundary file so we could get a geographic perspective. The other layer, as you can see, is a grid layer, and this is something I created manually. Using the grid tool from the toolbar, I created a 10 by 10 grid. And the purpose of this exercise, or what we're hoping to achieve, is a assignment of an attribute that counts the number of cell phone towers within each area. Now this obviously could be derived from maybe town boundaries or county boundaries as well, so it would again perform the same count. So looking quickly at the data, I can see in this tile right here there are no points, so we should get a value of 0 in here. Moving down to one of these tiles in the middle, it seems like there's a lot more towers, so that value should be a lot larger. Again, the process is going to allow us to automatically apply that attribution. Currently, if I use my feature info, you'll see it's absolutely no attribution. These tiles were simply created within Global Mapper. They weren't derived from an existing layer, so the attribute table is completely blank. Now, in order to initiate this process, I need first to select all of the tiles. I can do this in a couple of ways. I can simply use the digitizer and draw a box around the extent of the tiles. Now this is the reason that I made the points unselectable. I'm not selecting any of the underlying points, I'm simply selecting the tiles. I could also have right-clicked on the layer in the Overlay Control Center and chosen to select all. That's another mechanism. Either way, all of my tiles are selected, all of my grid tiles are selected. I'm going to right-click and I'm going to go to attribute style functions. We referred to this earlier. This is a set of tools that allow you to assign attribution based on some sort of characteristic from another file or from another layer or from something inherently in this layer itself. And you'll see some of the examples in here. Things like adding elevation, we'll do that in a few minutes. Adding the measure attributes, in other words, the dimensions would be added as attribution. If you have a feature and you change its shape, maybe change some of the vertices, you can go into this tool and update those measure attributes to reflect the new dimensions of that feature. What I'm going to do in this case is to apply the count of points that are within each area. And that option is right here in the middle. So a new attribute will be assigned in which it's going to count the number of points that are physically contained in that area. You'll notice it's added a line count option as well. There are no lines in this case, so that's redundant. It's not going to affect this scenario, but it's a very simple process. No dialog box required. It's simply applied that value. I'm going to use my feature info now, and I'm going to select, well, let's first of all select the one we know that will be 0, and it is indeed 0. There is a new attribute that is counted 0 points. This particular area has 36 towers. And this was the one I think was probably most, 69 towers within this 10 by 10, 100 square kilometer area. So an automated way for adding an attribution based on the existence or the number of points within each tile. Okay, here's a different scenario, but it's again an automated attribution tool. Here we have an array of randomly placed points, and you'll notice underneath these points is an elevation layer. If you're new to working with terrain or elevation data, we have a number of webinars that we have conducted and recorded that cover working with terrain data, working with LiDAR data, and other variations on working with 3D data. So this is a 3D layer. Each of the locations, and you'll note at the bottom of my screen here as I move around, has a specific elevation value. It's a 3-dimensional layer. The points themselves don't have any existing attribution, as was the case in the previous scenario. What we're going to do with these points is we're going to add the elevation value from the underlying terrain layer specific to the location of those points. Once again, I need to select these points to make this work. I'm going to right click on the points in the Overlay Control Center this time. I'm going to choose Select All with the digitizer tool. The same end result as having simply dragged a box around the extent as I did before. Once again, with these selected, I have access to my right-click menu, including my attribute style functions, and specifically what we're going to do is apply elevation from terrain layer to the selected feature or features as the case in this scenario. And again, well, we've got request if we want to put meters or feet. Mine's a meter value, so I do want to put meters after each elevation value. Confirmation, you heard the ding in the background, 89 features have been updated. Choosing one of these points individually now, you can see we now have the elevation. As a bonus, we also get information on the slope at that location. So in this case, it's not only the slope angle, but the bearing of the slope. So as you can see, each point now has a compass bearing as well as the angle of the slope and as we asked for, the elevation value. And the final scenario that I'm going to show you, and again, apologies, we're overshooting our time just a little bit here. What we're going to do in this case is we're going to add address information to point locations. Now you'll see the visual representation of these points. I've made them look like little buildings. I'll use my feature info tool to select that building, and once again, completely empty. The underlying layer is a road layer, and that road layer, although I can't select it because I've again disabled the selection, includes address information, not only the street name but also the address range for each segment, and based on that and derived from that, I'm going to assign an address to each of these point locations. Once again, using the digitizer this time, I'll select the points. The roads are not selectable, and once again we right click, attribute style functions, and we're going to add address information from the roads to these selected points. And again, fingers crossed that this will work in this case. We'll try it. A threshold distance is being prompted. How close does this point need to be based on my unit of measure to the road to be assigned? I think I had previously used 50, so we'll leave 50 as it is. If obviously the point you're adding is some distance away from the road, you would need to address that. I'll click OK on this. Confirm that it's updated 7 of the 7 points. All of my points have been updated, and if I use my feature info tool once again, you'll note I have a precise address assigned to each of these points. It's also noted which side of the road. So this is 295 Capon Road right here in Gardner, the zip code here in Maine 04345, and that particular point is on the right side of the road.
Great, thanks David. So it looks like we are definitely out of time for today. Before we wrap up, I just want to let you know that if you've enjoyed our presentation and you enjoy learning about Global Mapper, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel and you'll receive notifications for our future webcasts.
That's right, and a lot of our presentations now, as you've seen, are recorded. We do occasionally do live webinars, and in fact next month we are going to be delivering a live webinar, next month being September. I believe the date is assigned to the 29th, and we're going to be rolling out, very excited, we're going to be rolling out version 17 of Global Mapper right about that time, so that's right around the release date. To coincide with that, we're going to do a live webinar introducing the new features and functions in 17. Now that presentation requires registration. As of yesterday, I think the day before yesterday, we do have that registration available on our website. You can go to the webinars page, follow the link and register for that. You will receive notification closer to the date with your unique URL. Benefit of those live webinars is we do have folks sitting in the sideline who will be there to answer questions, so you do have that opportunity for a more interactive experience. But for today, hopefully you got a lot of information about attribution. Hopefully this was useful to you. I'd like to thank Josie for all her help today.
You're welcome. Thanks, David.
And thank you all for attending. We'll speak to you next month.